Good evening. Welcome, one and all. This is the last of the 5, our History Wednesdays. Absolutely delighted to have all of you here. We have got a great mixture of people from St. Marcus and a few curious people who've wandered in from other congregations locally. Absolutely delighted to have you here. The wrap-up to all of this is going to be the story of our congregation, St. Marcus. I kind of held it off to the end. I'm hoping that that would be the one thing people might be interested in. If I took one of the other ones and put it last, I didn't want it to tail off. But to my great pleasure, I see that our numbers have held up. We've had over 50 people each night. I am honored and flattered to death that many of you care about history. So let us begin. This is a very popular sort of conceit for historically minded people back in the middle of the 1800s to do a pretend bird's eye view. And obviously the data would have been drawn from notes taken on ground level sketches and everything and whatever crude photographs there were. This is 1856. Photography was very crude back then. There's no way anybody took an aerial photograph. For one thing, the airplane had not been invented. It's conceivable that people went up in hot air balloons and might have done sketches from a hot air balloon. Those did exist. But it's just as likely, because these existed for every city. I think every town had sketches like this of it. Even the littler cities like Oshkosh and Fond du Lac had these as well. This one is by Charles Magnus in 1856. You can see how the east side, Juneau Town, got much bigger than the west side. That's because Solomon Juneau had a head start. He had a lot more capital, and he was closer to the lake. However, Kilburn got the last laugh because the east side was boxed in. There was a swamp and then the river outlet at the bottom end, at the south end. To the west, there's a hard stop with the river. And to the east, you cannot build out into the lake. So the only way you can build is north, and that's the only place the east side could grow. The west side could sprawl out indefinitely, and they did. So very soon, Kilburn Town was massively larger than the east side. And to this day, what we call Milwaukee's west side and north side are probably 10 times the size of the east side. Here is where the people at St. John's began casting their eyes to start a branch school. By the 1850s, they were growing like crazy. In 1857, the year after this sketch was made, they got a new pastor who persuaded them to give up their fear of denominations, and in 1857, they were persuaded to join the Wells. That made them grow even faster because now you're part of a network. And by the early 1870s, they were thinking already, we need to move. They did not have enough capital to build a whole new church, but they did have the ability to buy a house. It only cost them $1,000 for the building and the lot. And so they said, let's do it way on the edge of town. So here's where St. John's is. So they looked way out here. And this little stubby street right here was called Short Street. Here is St. John's in the Deer District, taken in 1872. This is about when they started thinking about opening up a branch school. That building they had bought from the Episcopalians, who, after only a couple of years of putting up this nice building, could not make a go of it, and they sold the building to St. John's. So St. John's really caught a massive break. St. Marcus had to toil for 6 years before they could sell that cheesy little house they were worshiping in and actually have a real church. So here's St. John's in 1872. Probably somebody was standing in an upper floor or on the roof of the Turner Hall on 4th Street. That's where this is located, kitty corner from Turner Hall. This is H. Howard Bailey's amazing drawing in 1872. You can see how hugely the city has grown in 20 years. And here you can see is what we now call, this first was called Sherman's Addition, and then it was called the 6th Ward when Sherman's Addition was platted and registered with Milwaukee in the 1850s, and today it's called Brewer's Hill. This is Hubbard Street. You can see it goes right through a ravine that's all been filled in. You won't see any of that anymore. This is Short Street. Now it's not quite so short anymore. Now it's 6 blocks long. And here is where St. John's picked to buy their house. As you can see, on the very edge of town. Much of that block was still used for grazing, cattle grazing, and a little farming. And here is where St. Marcus began, right here. A little house. It was, most of the houses on a numbered street would have the entrances on this street, but this one was a side entry house. Not sure what made them do that. And here's what it looked like in about 1950. The building has actually survived, although I have never seen a picture of it as the original St. Marcus School, the St. John's Branch School, and then the original chapel. I have not seen any photographs, interior or exterior, but the building is still standing. It was sold because buildings were pretty valuable, and believe it or not, the technology of jacking up a building, getting it on rubber tire dollies, and dragging it, even with horses, dragging it sometimes a mile or more, actually was a thriving business in that, and somebody bought our old chapel and school and dragged it all the way to the back cottage at 2717 North Pierce Street, and it's still there today. If you look today, this is what you'll see. It's obviously changed quite a bit. Obviously a newer foundation, although that foundation now goes back to 1881. The building, the siding is all kind of modern, and the windows have all been changed and all that stuff. These were 10 of the 13 lay people. These guys and their wives were the people who sacrificed and lived very humbly to build our organization. For the first 6 months, they had church services in the classroom, the one-room schoolhouse. So they had to move the school stuff as much out of the way as possible. And then they would sit in the benches where the school kids were all week. And after 6 months of that, they cleared out the upstairs, knocked down the interior walls, and made a little chapel upstairs. So for 6 years, these people and their friends had worship. And they hardly had any money between them. Almost everybody was pretty low income, was pretty poor. This was not a wealthy place. Here's the president of the congregation, Friedrich Harras. He's our first lay leader. Johann Pisto. Some of you have been around long enough to remember the secretary who was here in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and up to 1985. Her name is Edna Weitens. Is there anybody alive who still remembers Edna? Raise your hand if you remember Edna. At least 6 of you. That's amazing. This is her grandfather, Johann Pisto. Here's my great-great-grandfather, Karl Jeske. He became the secretary. And then this guy right here, John Helm, probably was the most well-to-do of the members. He owned a hardware store on 3rd Street. Some of you might remember Dorothy and Ruth Miller, 2 single gals, leaders in the congregation. They both died in the late 80s, and this is their grandpa. This is my great-great-grandfather, Karl Jeske's house, no longer standing. It was on 1st Street between Garfield and Lloyd. And he's not in this picture, but here's my great-great-grandmother, Ernestina, 3 of her girls, and looks like a couple of grandkids standing there. By the way, does anybody know why is there a great big block of stone on the sidewalk?
For Postal Service?
You're close. You're warned. It's not Postal Service, but that's a good guess. Getting out of, yeah, Scott got it. When you step out of your carriage, it's a big step. And especially the ladies were glad to break that long step down into 2. So this was for getting out of your carriages. This is John Helm's hardware store on 3rd Street. He did very, very well. He came to America. His father died young, and his mother in Ozaki County was stuck with a crude farm that she had bought. She turned it into a very successful business. Somehow he escaped and was not compelled to work on the farm his whole life to fill in for his missing father. Somehow his mother let him go free, because what he really wanted to do was get into the hardware business. And he did a very successful job and retired in 1895. These are the first 6 pastors at St. Marcus, one more interesting than the other. St. Marcus either had super gifted mega star leaders or people who badly needed to take a call to go somewhere else, anywhere but here. This is Joseph Westenberger, our first pastor. It's easy to think lightly of him. He only stayed 3 years. He came from the Iowa Synod and ended up back in the Iowa Synod. He kind of was a quitter. He kept getting angry and being in fights and getting upset and everything. And so he bounced around a lot. He probably served 8 different congregations, ended up back at dinky little country churches in Iowa. So I think he probably had a big mouth and probably talked himself out of various positions. But I will give him this. He's my hero in this. St. Marcus called him when we barely had a pot to relieve oneself in, as you say. And he gets here and he finds out, where's the school teacher? And they said, oh, well, he had to quit. He had to take a call to make budget room so we could hire you. So you're teaching school. So he taught our one-room school, plus was the pastor for 2 years. That's amazing. I think that is amazing. The second guy is just as interesting. Eugen Nutz, his name is, came in 1878. When Pastor Westenberger left in 1878, St. Marcus thought, all right, now we're screwed. We need a pastor. Where do we get one? Who's going to want to come and have a one-room school, teach school, and maybe and be in a little attic, be in an attic chapel. We're a pretty not a hot property to come and be a pastor at. Where are we going to get somebody? At the very same time, providentially, possibly with God's direct intervention, the Wells finally scraped together enough money and willpower to restart its seminary. The Wells had a seminary in a house in Watertown for 2 years in 1863 when the Northwestern College was built and had this wonderful new building. The seminary just assumed they could move right in, and they sure did. For 5 years, the seminary moved into Northwestern's, they called it the coffee mill because it had a cupola on top. But the college grew because it was also a prep school. Calling it a college was a little bit of an exaggeration. So that building for 5 years had 3 levels of education going on. Basically a high school, a prep school, a college, and a seminary all working out of that same building. So when it got full, the Northwestern Board of Directors coughed politely and suggested to the seminary that they consider looking for new quarters. The Wells could not even make the payments on either the payroll or the mortgage for the college. They were so broke. If you read the treasurer's reports from 1868, 1869, and 1870, it's enough to make you weep. They were running on fumes. They had no idea where they were going to make payroll for the next month. Everything was just pasted together. They had emergency fund drives and tried selling lifetime scholarships for a while, a terrible idea, putting all the risk on the college, although de-risking it for the families who were thinking of going. It was a terrible idea, but nobody had the sense to say, don't do that. There's got to be better ways to raise the money. Well, somehow they survived. But that doesn't help us with the seminary. What to do with the seminary? They cut a deal with the Missouri Synod to send all our young men down to St. Louis for 8 years, from 1870 to 1878. Finally, the Wells said, I think we're ready to stand back up on our own 2 feet. Thank you, Missouri, but we're going to relaunch our seminary. And they bought or probably rented 2 houses 1 block this way on Hubbard and Garfield. I don't believe the two houses standing on the corner and the second one in right now are the two houses. Those were built, to me, it looks like in the 1890s. But back in 1878, there were two houses there, and the synod rented them, put Pastor Nutz in one. He was the resident inspector, so he was dean, house mother, everything, plus instructor for all. He had to teach everything. There was only at first just two guys. He and Heineke came over from St. Matthew's, who had this booming big church, and he taught full-time at the seminary too. Those guys were animals for work. I cannot imagine how they didn't all just collapse and have strokes and nervous breakdowns from overwork. They worked like crazy people. And for chicken feed, too, the salaries were so tiny. Westenberger got $50 a month. That's all St. Marcus could afford. So the St. Marcus goes over and has a chat with Pastor Nutz. With Professor Nutz, the next block over at the seminary, and said, "Well, you're not busy Sunday mornings, are you?" And they talked him into accepting the pastorship of St. Marcus, on top of being one of two, later three, professors at the seminary. And he took both jobs. But in that situation over there in the rental houses only lasted for 2 years. What they did was the synod bought a shooting park, clubhouse and park, a couple of acres on about 13th Street, between 13th and 14th Street, and from just north of Walnut to about Vine Street. So basically about a 2-block square was a Schützenpark, the Germans called it. Germans are really big into a number of things. One is dancing. Germans love to dance. They love to drink beer. They love to sing, and they love to discharge firearms. And this shooting park was insanely popular. And they moved to a bigger park, and that meant that their shooting gallery, and I don't mean by this like pop guns at the state fair. This was cranking it up with real live ammunition and firing away. And you could rent some ammo and go and blast away to your heart's content. So they moved out, and the property became available. The synod bought it and scrubbed it out and cleaned it up and turned it into their first really, truly residential seminary. And it was there for, 12 years, from 1880 until 1892. And so Pastor Nutz tendered his resignation, said, "I'm sorry, but I now that we've moved, now we're moving, and our student body is so much bigger, I just can't do both jobs anymore." And so St. Marcus was crabby about that, and they probably said something, a variation of "don't let the screen door hit you," and out the door he went. However, he really was a great guy. His co-professor, Adolf Heineke, was a stud, a published author, famous everywhere, given an honorary doctorate from Concordia. He gets all the glory, but Nutz was a quiet performer. He just did his job well. His library, his extensive library, became the core of the seminary library. In 1902, there was a tragic accident, and he fell out of a second-story window and broke his neck and died shortly thereafter. A very tough way to end. Tough for his wife, great for him. I mean, what could be better than just walking around and all of a sudden the next thing you know, you say, "Oh, hi, Jesus, am I in heaven? I guess I am." That was good for him, tough for everybody else. Ironically, his brother was a prof at Northwestern College, and when he died, he left his massive library, which became the core of the Northwestern College library. Isn't that amazing? Two brothers both left their books to the libraries. The third guy is Georg George Reinsch. He got off to a great start. He led a building project for the new church. I'll show you a picture of that in a minute, in 1881. He kind of pushed the congregation into building him a proper parsonage that sat, right over here, right where our parking lot is right now, or where the garage, I should say, where the garage is that faces Garfield. That's where the house was. He got them to build that in 1884. But in 1890, he got into some trouble. And none of whatever histories I've been able to find of those years will say. They're trying to draw the cloak of charity because it probably was pretty embarrassing. I'll bet a significant amount of money, although I have no way of collecting until somebody finds the true answer. I'm sure it's something either to do with sex or money, one or the other, or perhaps public inebriation. That's a possible third, since Germans are involved. But he resigned in 1890, never served anywhere else. The censuses report that he had clerking jobs. However, he was a bright guy. It wasn't that he was some kind of dummy. His son, Paul, actually was the United States ambassador to China from about 1916 to about 1920, and he died in Shanghai. His grave is in Shanghai. That's pretty amazing, I think. Here is August Pieper, who took over for Pastor Reinsch. He came from Kewanee or Menominee. I get those mixed up. He had two pastorates. He was a graduate of the Wells, though at the time that they sent all their boys to St. Louis. So he was trained by Walther, the great Missouri Synod theologian. But Walther said, you need to go back to the Wells and you need to serve them. And Walther had so esteemed Pieper's brilliance, when Walther would do his writing for his dogmatics textbook and had Hebrew, Greek, and Latin quotations, he would use August Pieper as his proofreader to make sure all of his foreign language quotations were perfect. He had a very brilliant run here. Under his leadership, we built the school in 1894, and the church just exploded in growth. However, he was very disturbed to find all the games of chance at the school picnic, and he was especially outraged that they were making a ton of money selling beer to anybody who walked up. See, that back then there were no beer concessions where a tavern will have to pay a concession to the park owner. You could just go in, and if you had a strong back and had some ice to keep it cold, you could buy beer on your own and sell it in the park, with a mark it up 3 times and make a ton of money. And he hated that. He said, we're putting a stop to that. And he glared at him with those piercing eyes, and he would stare down even the Women's Service Guild. Pastor Pieper left because he took a call to the seminary, and he moved out to Wauwatosa, left that house over here. This is Ernst F. Dornfeld, 1902 to 1911. Ernst Dornfeld came from Kenosha. He was a very bright bulb. Vice president of the Synod, did quite a bit of writing, served on numerous boards. He especially served on the publishing boards. The Gemeindeblatt, which was the main Synod newspaper, the board of the Northwestern Publishing House, is on the Northwestern College Board. Very good leader. People loved him as a great shepherd of souls. He had a very kind heart and worked very, very hard. Unfortunately, he fell on the ice late in 1910. He did not get well from that. The agonizing injury done from his fall on the ice led to what was thought to be stones or something, skull stones or kidney stones or something. He went in for surgery. They found a cyst in his lungs that, or an embolism or whatever, some kind of cyst that nobody was aware of. There were no x-rays back then. And they found this, and it probably broke or ruptured, and he died a day later to great mourning. He's only 57 years old. Congregation was in deep mourning. They loved him. Way at the end, in 1911, he had set in motion with his key partners, the Women's Service Guild, the Ladies' Aid, of course, those were his key partners, started raising money for a new sanctuary because they had really outgrown the old one. And here is the guy who has set the permanent record for longevity, 44 years, Pastor Ernst Philip Dornfeld, replaced his father in 1911 and served till 1955. This is 1894 Sanborn fire map of what the block looked like in 1894. Here is the new church. I'll show you a picture in just a second. They call it the frame church because it was made of wood. Here is the house that George Reinsch lived in, August Pieper lived in, and both Dornfelds lived in it. This is the original house church and school, the one-room school. They moved it to the back of our lot, and this was a cheap, flimsy, like a barracks school that they threw up, knowing it was going to be temporary, so they didn't lavish too much care on it. It just had to warehouse kids. So there were 4 rooms in the school, 2 here and 2 here. They had to buy one more skinny lot. So now we've got essentially 2.5 50-foot lots. That's all the real estate the church owned. This was the alley that no longer exists. Here is the 1881 church. Member of the congregation was the carpenter contractor who built it. Actually, a kind of lovely building. You can tell they did not have a lot of money. Their original dream had a steeple, couldn't afford it. They had to chop the steeple off. And you can see the new school from 1894 around the corner. Here's the inside. This picture was taken in 1900 on the occasion of the 25th anniversary of the church. You can see, if you were here for my first talk on Heinrich Hofmann, here is Hofmann's portrait of Christ in Gethsemane. That very painting was saved, and it's hanging in the career gym hallway, which is at the end of that long hallway joining this part of the campus with the primary school, still hanging on the wall. You can see there was no electricity. The lighting was by gaslight. Electricity was not yet being delivered to retail yet. It was just in the beginning stages of building the first power plants in 1881. So there was no electricity in this building, no running water either. Outhouses in the back, and the lights were gas. This was not piped in from gas fields in Oklahoma or Texas or Louisiana. This was synthetic gas. It was made at the gas transformation plant at the south end of the 3rd Ward and piped around the city. You can also see how crowded everything was. They jammed. They were in, even by 1900, they had to put chairs up and skinny down the aisle. There's chairs all stacked around here. They packed chairs in wherever they could. And these horseshoe balconies were added in the 1890s because the crowds just demanded it. This altar and this pulpit were saved, and they were put into the next building. Here's the old parsonage. That building is still standing. When we no longer needed it and were thinking that's where our school expansion was going, we gave it away to a really nice guy who was a carpenter contractor, and he, on his own dime, got a moving contractor and moved the building and set it down on a lot he had bought on Palmer and Brown. So it's about 3 blocks from here now. Looks great. He did a terrific job fixing it up. This is the staff in 1890. That's Pastor Reinsch in the middle. Right before, later this year, after this picture was taken, is when he had his scandal. So he didn't know it, but he was on the St. Marcus payroll not very long. This is teacher Fritzke, the principal. This is teacher Nimmer, Fred Nimmer. This is teacher Heinrich Amling. And this is Miss Ickert, the primary grade teacher. You'll see in a minute how big her class load was. There it is. Count them. There's like 75 kids in that. She quit.
She doesn't look too happy.
With the flimsy excuse of nervous exhaustion. She doesn't look real happy, does she? She looks kind of grim right here. These are all her kids. Pastor Pieper now organized a fund drive, and they started building a new school. They cleared off the 2 little buildings, actually sold them. There was actually market value. They got almost $1,000 for each of them, which was cheaper than building it apparently. And they hauled them off. One actually survived as a hardware store for quite a few years, but neither one is standing any longer. And they built this beautiful brick school. You met my great-great-grandfather, Karl Jeske, one of the founders. His son, Gustav Jeske, my great-grandfather, was a mason contractor, and he built the school. At least he had the masonry contract for the school. There it is. It's finished condition. Lasted until 2002. A grand old building. We were glad to see it go, and yet sad to see it go. We had a lot of great memories there. This is in 1909. Here you can see what the front of the wooden church looked like. That's Teacher Montai with his middle graders. You can see the class sizes got a little smaller, thankfully, so we didn't wreck any other teacher's health. And in 1913, the old wooden building was demolished. A few pieces, little pieces, were saved, and they hired the firm of Leiser and Holst to design a beautiful new sanctuary, hired Gustav Jeske and Son to be the masonry contractors. So he did both the old school and our current sanctuary. It was finished in 1914. This must have been taken shortly after the dedication. You can see from that limo right there. This was pretty new. You can see the beat-up old fences. This, before we had nice chain link fences, we had chicken wire nailed to wooden posts. But a very handsome building. It was so impressive when Paul Kretzmann also fancied himself a student of design, art, and architecture, and he wrote a book called Christian Art in 1921, and a prominent plate was dedicated to St. Marcus. So he held this up as a model. It was built in what I call the English Gothic style, though the interior was still German Gothic. There's a little cognitive dissonance here. Fortunately, you couldn't see them side by side. But the inside had the curvy, curly stuff that the Germans so loved. But the outside, in England, English Gothic has wider, fatter windows, and the slope of the windows is more gradual. It's not so sharp. The German Gothic had slender windows with tall, spiky, pointed tops. They kept the old altar and pulpit and baptismal font. Who can guess why there's 2 columns of numbers on the hymn board? German and English, yeah. The left column was for the earlier German service, and because the English-speaking people were not as diligent as the Germans and were sloppily lying in bed all morning, they got the later service. See, it looks very similar to today. You also might be able to see the rows of light bulbs here. The church until 1950 was lit by rows of light bulbs. St. John's on Vliet still has their light bulbs. If you look really close, you can see the little bumps. Those are the light bulbs. In fact, if you look up here and you catch the light just right, you can see the indentations where the trustees, where our building committee plastered in where there used to be light sockets. Here is Pastor Dornfeld, the younger, Pastor EPH, young guy with his graduation class in 1915. This is the auditorium of the old school. What a lovely curtain they had with the passementerie here. It's beautiful little fringes. And looks like the Wartburg Castle is the painted backdrop for the stage. Kind of a cool thing. Pastor Dornfeld was getting killed with work. By 1921, St. Marcus had 2,100 members. There were 200 and some in the school. And he was probably doing 50 weddings a year. And by mid-year of 1921, he had already had 21 funerals. He got a call to Northwestern College to be a professor, and he announced to the church council, I probably need to take this. I'm burning out here. I cannot keep up with the pace here. And they panicked because they loved him. He was a very solid, good pastor. Not like super flashy, but anybody who can manage an organization of that size and people like you, you're really doing a lot of things right. So they panicked and they said, well, we'll get you another pastor. How about it? And so they talked him off the ledge. Nobody wanted to take the call, so they went to the SEM. And interestingly, this is the seminary graduating class of 1921. They actually got their next 3 pastors off of this picture, which is kind of funny, isn't it? They got a graduate. His name is Gustav Adolf Zeisler. Gustavus Adolphus Zeisler. He's named for the Swedish king who fought for Germany in the 30 Years' War, sort of a German hero. He was a nice enough fellow, but by the lack of praiseworthy comments made about him, I think nobody was sad when he got a call to Managua and he took it and went up to Managua. He didn't last there very long either. He came back to Milwaukee, took a call to Golgotha on 4th Street. None of you have ever heard of Golgotha before. It hasn't been there since 1958. They have the distinction of being the first Lutheran church to bail on the central city of Milwaukee and move somewhere else. So he's gone. So now in 1923, they called this guy, Walter Gieschen, from way up north in a little town that's so small, neither the town nor the church exists anymore. He was probably glad to leave. His family, his dad was the pastor at Jerusalem. He came all fired up to be the pulpit king of Milwaukee. However, number one, old man Dornfeld was still there, who had all the reins of power. Secondly, they said, oh, by the way, we have a faculty vacancy. Guess what you're going to be doing? He's teaching 5th grade. Oh, boy. And then they did it to him again the second year. They had him teaching for most of the year because they could not find teachers. So they said, well, pastor, you're not doing anything all week until it's your turn to give a sermon, so you might as well teach. So he hated it, and he left in 2 years also. Then Pastor Dornfeld thought, all right, struck out twice from the seminary with young guys. What are we going to do? Let's get an old guy. So he pitched a deal to Professor John Meyer from the Wauwatosa Seminary. Here you can see it. After 1892, they left the shooting gallery clubhouse and built a beautiful new building on 60th and Lloyd on what used to be the Pabst Brewing Company's hop farm. Pabst outgrew it because by the turn of the century, their production needs were way beyond what those few acres could provide. That's when Pabst went out to Oconomowoc, and what is now called Pabst Farms, those were the Pabst hops farms. His hair was white prematurely. Ever since he was at the seminary, his hair was white. So the Latin word for snow is nix, N-I-X. So they called him Nixie, snowtop. Or as my son John calls people of my generation, silver tops, he calls us. But he was a white top. He had like a white cap. They called him Nixie. And he was a legend in the Wells, served for 2 generations at the seminary, first at Watertown, and then in 1930, they moved out to their present digs in Thiensville, Mequon. He would speak once a month, more often if needed, and that Pastor Dornfeld so valued being spelled with having a weekend off that he could do other work and get caught up on other work. He loved it, and that arrangement with one little interruption lasted until about a week before Nixie died in 1964. I kid you not. He had given the sermon here at St. Marcus just days before he died. He taught till he was in his 90s. The guy was a machine.
Did he ever get a driver's license?
I don't think so.
Because they'd have to go to pick him up.
Nixie could get in the station, which was just down the hill from the seminary campus, for one low fare. He could take it all the way to 3rd and North, walk the last couple of blocks. He'd do that on Saturday night. He'd let himself into the church. There was a couch in the sacristy. He would stretch out, yawn, pull a cover over him, and sleep and get up and be ready to go for the German service and the English. And the members loved him. He shepherded the Wells doctrinally through many storms, the Protestant explosion, the CLC migration and exodus, and what to do with the Missouri Synod, and ultimately the divorce with the Missouri Synod, 61. He was our steady pilot and guide through those terrible doctrinal storms. This is the youth group in 1925. The youth group was huge. People were very social back then. They didn't have much money, but people had social capital. That was their wealth, as in their friends. This is the Frauenverein in 1925. This is only half of it. It took 2 pages in the yearbook, and there was a group just as big as this of the other ladies, the A to M and the N to Z. There were lots of SCHs. In 1925, the church was still desperate to keep Pastor Dornfeld around, so they said, we'll build you a house. And that persuaded him to stick around, because now he could be in this brand new house. Building's still there. It's on North Avenue, across the street on the 212 block of East North Avenue. He lived in it, and the Nickelbines lived in it. The Nickelbines moved out in 1967, right when the riots hit Milwaukee, and the new pastor who came right after the riots, Pastor Seeger, for some crazy reason did not want to live there. Possibly the fact that it had been broken into twice and set on fire twice made his wife say, Dick, no, don't even ask. Ain't going to happen. These are rare color photographs from the 1940s, just as color photography was getting to be a thing. Only a few people had color film. It's very expensive and tricky to use. Here you can see the beautiful silver leaf stenciling. The church was loaded with stenciling. Unfortunately, it was also getting very dingy. So by the end of the 40s, now the war is over. Finally, you can buy materials. And the congregation said, we want to spruce things up. We want to get rid of all this old stuff. By the way, here you can see the light bulbs glowing up here on the first arch. Here was the old pulpit. That has completely been lost. Nobody knows what happened to that stuff. I asked Marge Wolfgram, whose husband was the chair of the building committee, I asked her in the 1980s, why did you get rid of the old pulpit? And she said, well, I think because it was worn out, she said. That was the end of that discussion. There's nowhere to go. Where do you go after that? 1950, the anniversary year, it's now the 75th anniversary. This is a student body. All the teachers are out here. They're all playing games with the kids. Pastor Dornfeld, now nearing the end of his time at St. Marcus, and the workload was still increasing, although the church size was shrinking. They called a young guy from the seminary who had emergency taught for a year in New Ulm, and his name was Jeske. Why not? The church was full of Jeskes from the past, so why not get one of the founders' great-grandsons to be our pastor? So he came here in 1949 as a single guy, married my mother in 51, and in 53 got a call to St. John's Root Creek. Make sure you listen to that proper pronunciation. And was there for 17 years. This is the Sunday school staff in 1950. Old-timers will remember Edna Vitens. She was not only ran the church office, she was the Sunday school superintendent. Here's Eileen Utek, head of the Mission Society for many years. And here's Pat Steliga, who a couple of weeks ago we just sent off to heaven. In 2020, at our January ministry banquet, we honored her for having volunteered for 70 years at St. Marcus, from 1950 to 2020. And we gave her the mic, and she said, thank you, everyone. I hope to continue to volunteer for many more years. This is a very significant picture. This is Pastor Dornfeldt's last graduating class. Here's the faculty up here. This is one of the amazing Gam sisters, Dora Gam. This is Walter Fodder, Dorothy Wolf. This, I believe, is the chair of the school board. Here's Pastor Dornfeldt, and that's Bob Eberhardt. And here's Lenora Gam. These were their last, I think she and Dora taught one more year. Those two dames taught from 1911 until 1955. They each taught for 44 years. Insane. Pastor Dornfeldt, by the way, retired from St. Marcus in 55, but he wasn't ready to quit. He took over the smaller Nathaniel Lutheran Church on 50th and State, and he served it 7 more years. The guy's a machine. I can't believe it. Those guys wouldn't quit. The most interesting thing, though, about this picture is this is 1955, Montgomery bus boycott, Rosa Parks, and right here is St. Marcus's first black kid to graduate from our school. This is Leon Todd. Later was elected to the Milwaukee School Board. He was the first of many. And in fact, the social change in our neighborhood was so rapid and so emotion-filled and panicky. The moving of black folks into the near north side triggered a massive abandonment of the city by white folks. The white flight was like a tidal wave. St. Marcus went from being an all-white school with one lonely black kid in 1955. By 1972, that is only 17 years later, there weren't any white kids in the school. It was all black. It happened that fast. That is a recipe for social chaos, and sure enough, that is what happened. Pastor Nickelbein came in 55 and insisted that he have the freedom to evangelize among black families. He is the reason why St. Marcus is multicultural and multiracial today. I give him all the credit for it. In the middle 60s, Ephrata Lutheran Church on 2nd and Concordia was shrinking in size, and they could not afford a pastor. They asked Pastor Nickelbein if he would serve them as a dual parish. So he did. Starting in 65, he would have an early service at Ephrata and then drive like a madman down to North Avenue to have St. Marcus' service. By then, our German service had been discontinued, not for theological reasons, but the German deacons said, we just don't get enough people to justify it anymore, and they reluctantly closed the German services. Thus, enraging Ewald Gust, Lily's dad, who never forgave St. Marcus for taking away German church, and he joined the little German flock that ended up at the WLC chapel, Sankt Michaelis. But Antonia Gust and Lily stayed. How about a round of applause for the Gust women? Woo-hoo! 1967, all hell broke loose in the city. We had 3 ugly days of ugly, ugly race rioting. 1,700 people were arrested, 4 people were murdered, dozens and dozens of buildings had arson attacks, power lines were knocked down, plate glass windows were smashed, and stores along 3rd Street were looted. 3rd Street, yes, 3rd Street. That's just a couple blocks here. St. Marcus went into panic mode. Edna Vitens told me for 3 straight days she didn't come to work. She lay on her face on the living room floor and would only get up to get something to eat and go to the bathroom and would go back and lie down on the floor. She was terrified of all of the gunfire and gunshots. She was afraid one would go through a window and plug her. That's the level of panic in the city. One of those 4 people murdered was a police officer, too. It was ugly. The National Guard was called out. Here they are at Teutonia and Center. After that summer of chaos, Pastor Seeger took our call in 1967. He was a missionary first in Japan and then Hong Kong, and he came with a missionary's heart. He's a big, fearless guy and absolutely committed to continuing the outreach to African Americans, to make them feel wanted, welcome, and part of the St. Marcus family. He was a great big guy with great big confidence, and We had been losing members like crazy in the 50s and earlier 60s, and he brought some confidence back and stabilized the congregation. He had a great big voice. He would sing louder than any 30 or 40 members put together, and he decided what pace the singing of the hymns was going to go at, not the organist. The organist, you can fight, they can say you can't fight City Hall. You cannot fight the pace Pastor Seeger has picked for the hymns. So here is the new look after 1950. Blonde. We are now in Denmark, ladies and gentlemen. This is Danish blonde. But you can also see the fact that the Ultra Guild's creativity has now been cut loose. Pastor Nickelbein hated banners. Good thing he's retired and was up north, because we started putting banners in. You can see the Advent wreath over here. All of these chrismons on the tree were handmade by dear women who squinted over them in bad light and stitched them all together. The Ultra Guild bought all of these Italian plaster figures for our nativity set, and because the gospel choir wanted to sing in front, we rolled the best piano we had over from the school and rolled it over here. It was a Norwegian-made Bjur Brothers, B-J-U-R. In the middle 90s, the school was getting so shabby, we did a mini fundraiser and overhauled it and really spiffed it up. Remember the color of the trim before that mid-90s renovation? What color was the trim on the church screens and the school screens? What color were the frames painted? Pink! You think I'm making it up. I am not making that up. I have photographs. I didn't want to put them up because they're so ugly. But it looked like $1 million. We put landscaping in. We bought another lot, expanded the parking lot. The school really looked so much better, and we were starting to grow again as a school. The old auditorium, we cleaned out, thanks to Brad Shopper, cleaned out all of the asphalt tile, hired a guy to come in and burn up his belts, sanding belts, and found the original maple floor. We had a gym. We actually had a home game for the first time in St. Marcus's long history. We had a home game. We had cheerleaders. It was awesome. Here is our student body in 1995, sitting in front of that canopy that had, or the curtain that had the Wartburg Castle from 1915. We bought some land across the alley and had a beautiful playground out here. You remember the playground? Playfield was really beautiful. That grass was soft as could be. And we would do our Juneteenth days out on this lot. We bought some more land across the street when we had a chance to buy some land when an apartment building was torn down. Back then, that's one advantage of our neighborhood being so beat up. When land would become available, if we jumped in, we could get it for a song. I don't think we paid much more than a few $100 for that lot. And then we bought a store. There was a little storefront here, and there was a violent shooting there, and the store closed down. And we were the only ones who cared, and we held our noses and bought that and tore that down too. This is St. Jacobi Lutheran Church on 13th and Mitchell, and I ask you to take a look at this. You might have seen that before. In fact, you might be looking at it right now. They moved out to 86th and Forest Home, and their poor old building was torn down, but a syndicate of members could not bear to see that beautiful altar. It was made here in Milwaukee, carved in 1905. They could not bear to see it wrecked. So they bought it, had it dismantled, and Gilbert Mansky had it put in his garage. He didn't ask his wife, and she wondered why he was parking on the driveway when she came home. And when she lifted up the garage door, she found out the reason. The whole altar plus the pulpit, not the canopy, but the communion rail and the lectern were all dismantled in pieces and sitting inside his garage. And stayed there for 7 years. By an amazing fluke, they gave it to us. I'll spare you since I'm out of time. I'm kind of going a little long. Sorry, I'll go fast to the end. They gave it to us, and in 1997, we summoned the nerve and the money to put it in and have it done professionally. Here's what it looks like today. Here is Christmas at St. Marcus now. The Altar Guild bought those beautiful pew torches. Here's Carol's junior choir for a long run of years. She killed it with her huge choirs. Have you noticed how many jackets and ties are in the first 3 rows? She set records for most middle school age boys begging to get into a choir. This doesn't happen anywhere else, I'm here to tell you. This is one of our Celtic Sundays. That's Michaela Sullivan dancing up a storm. And her father made that portable board so she could put on her hard shoes, and you could hear her thundering away on the boards. That's Joey Schumann on the left. 2001, we started recording and broadcasting for television on Time of Grace. In 2002, we were finally ready to replace our old school. We raised enough money not to add on, but to demolish the old school. This is the YMCA, the old YMCA on 11th and Garfield. They just opened up their new Y on 14th Street, thus making this available. And at the last possible minute, Cole and I went over there and negotiated with the trustees of the YMCA, and we leased that building for 15 months. It was a lifesaver. We could move all our operations into that building for a whole year. In the meantime, in May of 2002, the old school went the way of all flesh. Sad to see it go. Also, it was a big year. Henry Tyson took our call. Henry, before he had received an actual call from us, had already put an offer in on a house in the neighborhood. So I think he was already in. In fall of 2002, we stopped having vicars. I loved our vicars, but the workload was now getting really big, especially with television going on. So we called our second pastor, Pastor Ski. He was the school pastor, and also I charged him with launching a new worship service on Sundays, or whatever time slot he picked that would be different from Sunday morning. And here's his house band, Benj Lorenz on the right, Brian Davison. You can see Seth Cook in the back. This is a later iteration of him, Tracy Fedke on the left. Koine became really famous. They're still pretty famous. Here's the new school going up. It is now our middle school, but back then it was just the school. And there is the new building. We were so proud of our building. Our pride in our ministries exploded and our chests were pounding. Instead of being embarrassed and a little nervous about inviting people down to the central city, we're now bragging come on down, this is where it's happening. Pastor Steinberg came after Pastor Ski left in 2008. Pastor Ski went up to Appleton, and we got Pastor Steinberg from northern Wisconsin. He became our school pastor and pastor of outreach. Time of Grace wanted half of my time, so we called another pastor, Pastor Hewitt, and he took over the Sunday night service that Pastor Ski had left behind. Here's my favorite school performance ever. These are the California Raisins. Rebecca Hanneman put their outfits together, and their little dance routine was just the coolest thing ever. In 2010, we were ready to expand again, and this was our beautiful playground, our playfield, about to get chewed up, and the primary school is being built here. That's what it looks like today. We've now got 250 kids in each of those wings. There's got to be at least 500 or 600 kids on the main campus right now. Pastor Schaefer came in 2011 when I went full-time to Time of Grace. Here is our second gym, the career gym, under construction. There you can see it nearing completion. This is one of Carol's great musicals. Carol, what was the name of your Under the Sea musical? Go Fish. Great fun. They literally got hundreds of kids on the cast of their musical. They all had costumes. They all were totally into it. One great hit song after another. This is Emily Abeling. She's the painter of our Lord's Supper triple picture out in the atrium at her studio in Newburgh. Carol got promoted to directing the Cherub Choir. There she is with her cherubs. She absolutely killed it. This was a small group on Sunday. She would often get 50 or 60 kids singing in her cherub choir. In church, at rehearsals, she would often have over 100. This is Stephanie Behrens, who painted our triptych of Pentecost Today. Brilliant painter. She has a career as a professional painter now. Our drumline loved their work. Here's the gospel choir at Martin Luther College in New Ulm. A couple of faculty members were hospitalized for stroke after we sang. This is our first major campus expansion. On the left is the old natatorium on Center Street. It was retrofitted into being a little kids' gym, and then this classroom and cafeteria wing was added. There must be about 250 kids on this campus today. Now it's called the Center Street campus. And here it is from Hubbard Street, looking at it from this angle. Here's some of their crazy faculty horsing around. Pastor Hine came as our senior pastor in 2016. In 2017, we rebuilt half of the organ, only half. Some of you may be getting a phone call or a letter from me inviting you to participate in helping me raise money to do the swell half. That side, unfortunately, was not rebuilt, and it needs it. But the great half, the right side, was much worse. Here is the keyboard going up the ramp. Scared me to death looking at those pictures. Jerry Seaton was here and actually watched the whole thing go up the ramp without having a stroke. Jerry, I don't know how you did it. I'd have panicked. Here is Jeff playing on the new organ, mighty proud. He can't stop smiling when he plays the organ. This is a guy named Tim Pearson. He is the metal sculptor who sculpted this is called a Shattered Christ. It's the broken Christ. I love this artwork. It's in the primary school lobby for three main reasons. Number one, we preach Christ crucified. What better silent visual symbol could you have of why we exist? Second, it's indestructible. It's made of welded metal. You can't hurt it. Kids are always touching stuff. They can touch this all they want. They can't hurt it. And third, most of the kids who go to that school are brown in color, and I like it because Jesus is brown on this particular version. They can see themselves in their Savior. This is one of the Saturday nights, big events of the year. They have their outdoor service. Was finished in 2020. The Gifts of the Reformation. They're in the west wall of the atrium. Here's Pastor. My thing must have skipped over Pastor Lyra. No offense, Pastor Lyra. Must have double clutched. Too much caffeine today. Here is. This is Pastor Krieger, Pastor Joel Krieger. He is filling in for Pastor Lyra, who's still on the payroll, but he is doing Pastor Lyra's work, and the synod pays him. So it's a little synod racket that we can't fix, but you just have to play along with it. So don't ask. I don't want to hear your ideas to say that's ridiculous. I know. Just don't ask. Pastor Kelly is a pastoral assistant working on his PSI certification, we're working towards ordination. And finally, since we had only two campuses, why have two when you can have three? And so when we had the chance to buy another campus, why not? And so we did. Bought the old St. Elizabeth campus, put a lot of money into it. The building was in worse shape than we thought. It underwent a massive rebuild, all 4 floors. There's a big lower level in the basement too, full basement, usable space. And then added, that thing on the right is an addition to the building. They call that the gateway. Here's the old look from Burleigh Street. And ultimately that will have probably 500 kids on that campus too. The 3rd floor was just finished. Brendan Sullivan will tell you all about it, since he probably has patrolled every one of those hallways himself. Here is an example from our fine arts series. This is the incredible singing group Chanteclair sang for us one Christmas, blew us away. They are fabulous. They are as good as any group in the city, and I include bel canto and the symphony chorus among that. They are a fabulous choir. We are flattered to death that they would ask to come and sing here. They said this is the only Lutheran church they're going to sing in. And the end. This is our neighborhood. We're called to serve Milwaukee and the world. And all I can say is happy birthday, St. Marcus. Happy 100th birthday. How about giving up a big round of applause for God for blessing us all this way?